This is our very first in our fall series, and today we're going to be talking about virtual reality. We've got a slightly different format this semester, so we're going to be doing this introduction to virtual reality today with Bill Sherman and Chauncey Frend. And then if you want to get your hands dirty, next week will be an expedition, and you can come and you can basically try on a whole bunch of different kinds of headsets. You can experience a whole bunch of different kinds of virtual reality environments. So those are supposed to be really sort of a great way to engage things that you'll learn about here. And then we'll have a guest lecture on September 12th with Tori Galloway from the IU Center for Underwater Science. We're actually really lucky here to have, they've done a full photogrammetric model of one of Captain Kidd's wrecks found off the coast of the Dominican Republic. They go every summer. So if you take this class, you can go with them. So they also have done a bunch of stuff off of Florida, and then we processed some things from Lake Michigan. So if you thought photogrammetry was hard, which is a method of 3D digitization with cameras, now try doing it underwater. But anyway, I'm really interested to have them come and talk to us. And then on the 19th is Advanced Media with Chris Eller, Matt Mercer, and me. And we're going to be just talking about how you can, some advanced media workflows with 360s and things like that, and then also how you could take advantage of these walls that are located all over campus. On the 26th is 3D digitization, which is with Jeff Rogers. And we'll be talking about multiple modes, so from photogrammetry to scanning to other things. And then we're going to fall into that same sort of expedition thing where you can come get your hands dirty and really try some things out. And then we're going to have Albert William is from IUPUI. He's going to talk to us about digitization for cultural heritage. He goes to Greece every summer, and I think he's going to be bringing in some examples of some digitization he's done there. On the 17th, really it's mostly Chris. He's been talking about these IQ walls. I don't know if I can do this or not. Is it going to work? Okay. So this is a brand new wall. You can see the girder from the old wall for this room. And the reason I went to touch it is it's touch enabled, which I'm really, really excited about. Because sometimes one of the things about driving a big wall like this is that you're sort of going between a keyboard and whatever, and that can be really awkward. And I think the touch capability of this wall is going to be a really great fit. We'll be talking though about all the different affordances. We also have stereo walls where if you have stereo glasses on, you can now see in 3D. We have walls with tracking, so all kinds of stuff. And then, you know, we decided we'd give you Halloween off after the expedition. Yay! And then we're finally going to wrap up with augmented reality with Chauncey and have the same sort of structure. And we've got some really great special talks on the 21st where there's an IU app that for the bicentennial where you can go around campus and you can see what things used to look like. Which I think is really cool. And then also the Eskenazi Art Museum is also piloting a project using AR. So please join us for all of these, and it won't always be as pixely, but someone hit update. You know how like once you hit update, like you can't get out on a Windows machine? So this is not being driven natively at the moment. So this wall can actually be much prettier, believe it or not. But I'm going to hand it over to Bill and to Chauncey now. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Tassie. All right, yeah, so as Tassie said, Chauncey and I will be presenting today on XR at IU. So XR being virtual, the R is reality, X can be replaced with virtual or augmented or mixed. Primarily, probably 90% of the time we're talking about virtual reality. We'll talk about the differences a little bit into the talk. So the first thing I want to do then is talk kind of specifically about virtual reality, although this definition actually, I could just change the V into an X. So this is the definition I use. It's a lot of words, so I like to break it down into bullets. So basically, there's 4 bullets that are part of this definition. The first is that virtual reality is a medium. It's a means of communicating between people. And so in particular, it's an interactive medium. So the world is shared between people through the movement, the actions, the inputs of the person who's the receiver or the audience of the medium. Part of virtual reality is that the user, the receiver, is tracked by the computer. The computer knows where you're at, knows where your head is looking, knows what you're doing. You might have noticed my colleague here, the picture changed a little bit to reflect that he's being tracked, and in the next few pictures, it'll go back and forth. So that's a key part of virtual reality, so essentially the key part of virtual reality. But from that tracking data, now we want to draw the world based on how you move around or how that receiver moves around. So we want to display to the user in one or more senses. So when we say display, it's not necessarily visual. It could be audio, could be touch, could be smell for that matter. Chauncey's done some work on that. And you'll see in my definition actually says replace or augment. So this is where this really does kind of fit the XR definition as well as VR. And then the last thing is we want to, the goal of all this is to put the user into the computer simulation that we talked about in the first bullet, the virtual world. And to a large degree, put them mentally immersed into that space. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's kind of the definition in a bullet form. Once you have created a virtual reality experience, there's really, I feel, there's 5 key elements to that experience. The first 2 are the people involved, the people who created the experience, and the people who experienced the experience, and the people who created the experience, of which actually the people who are the ones in the display are part of the creators to some degree. The world itself, so you model spaces, you model interactions, we call that the virtual world. The physical immersion, that's that tracked and the perspective rendering, and then some form of interactivity. And then the key to that then is the thing that makes VR unique is this physical immersion thing. The fact that when you move your head, the world sees that, or the computer notices that you've moved your head and it changes how it draws, how it displays the world. And so one of the things you can do then is, if you notice this picture before, it looked like a triangle sitting on top of a square, but as Alan here moves his head around, you can see it's actually 3-dimensional objects, one of which is a cube, and that it's a pyramid that's behind the cube, not on top of the cube. And so you can see these hidden relationships, and that's really one of these key things for virtual reality. So that's this physical, getting involved in your space. This is a picture of a colleague or colleague of sorts who's worked in virtual reality for a long time, and he kind of really got involved in that experience there. But in part of our definition, we also talked about being mentally immersed, feeling present into the space. So the physical immersion is this: you move around and the world responds to you interactively. But we also said in our definition that we want to be mentally engaged in the simulation. And so that's where we get a world. So in this case, people going to see a movie are often mentally engaged in the experience. If you know anything, that movie has kind of a meta thing too, where the people come out of the movie. But anyway, so engaging the world mentally is also important. But as we saw with physical immersion, there are other media, so novels, computer games, movies, that can also mentally immerse you into the space, right? So becoming mentally immersed in some medium doesn't make it VR. It's not a requirement of VR. I guess what I'm saying is the physical immersion is kind of the defining characteristic of virtual reality, but we have a goal of being mentally immersed, but so do other people working in other media, right? Now that said, while it's not required, it still can help you get involved. So in this particular example, I'll have pictures of it later, but I'll talk about it while we have them up now. This was a VR experience created by a photographer who is a fine artist, and she had pictures of her paintings, or her photographs rather, in this virtual space. But what she's really trying to convey is that she had suffered a car accident, and as a result of that, suffered some brain injury. And once her body healed, she also had like broken legs and stuff. Her body had healed, and so people thought, oh, you're better, right? But she still was suffering some optical and other mental deficiencies that people couldn't tell were wrong with her, right? So she would walk around, and then she would kind of lose her balance because the world looked all warped like this. And so she wanted to give people that experience. And so she used virtual reality then to provide this mental immersion, to put people into her footsteps. So I'll let Chauncey, this is oh yes.
We're gonna be swapping mics because of the people online. And in future talks, maybe we'll have a couple mics. So pragmatically, when thinking about these technologies, I call them spatial technologies. That's why it's kind of nice to use XR, because they are very much related. We're not going to talk a lot about AR today, but the point I'm trying to make is you can think of them on a continuum. Now, Bill and I we don't butt heads about this, but we do debate about this, which is a healthy thing to do. And what I mean by this is you start on one side with just the spatial real environment, because these are like, they're not really field technologies, things you deploy out in the field, quote unquote, but they're slowly being more capable to do that, right? So if you're interacting with the real world versus the virtual world, you kind of have like this elongated continuum of different phases of how this cycles with reality versus data and interactivity with data itself. I'm going to give it back to you in a second. So, yeah, so as we go through just various examples, you're going to see that some of these examples fit in different categories, and companies have marketed all sorts of names for mixed reality, augmented reality. In fact, this paper that was originally published back in the early 90s, they call it the Milgram's Continuum. It's a nice thing to go to communicate this relationship, but what's important to know is that even then, companies were trying to kind of put their brand into this continuum. Say Virtuality, which is a company that's come and gone. So the important thing to take away, I guess I will hook this up here. In terms of how at IU in the IT kind of sphere, we look at using spatial technologies or XR technologies, is there's really three types of ways that you can get started. And we're going to revisit this, so I don't need to belabor it too much, but what you have to take away here is really just the amount of work you're putting into getting access to a spatial technology for some sort of use. So what everyone assumes they have to do when they have a vision is build your own application and use your own data and build it from the ground up. And that's great if you can do that. Most people don't want to have to do that. So we say, look what's out there. Find things that exist already, they're already built, and just use those for your purposes. Like Google Earth VR is a good one to get started with, and we'll talk more about that for a lot of different cases. And then type 2 is this nice sweet spot in the center where you're actually maybe bringing your own data to the party and using a viewer, like a 360 video viewer, like YouTube VR, or even just taking photogrammetry data, which is 3D scanning data of objects and places, and putting that into a virtual reality headset or an augmented reality headset. So I'm going to hand back to Bill here.
All right. So go back to this notion of virtual reality as a medium, that first bullet that we had in our definition. Most people, especially if you're in the humanities, I would think you'd have a familiarity with what we mean by it. But to go to really the basic definition of medium, right, it's to be between two ends, two extremes of something. And so in particular, in literature and other forms of communication discussions, when we talk about media, we're talking about being between two people or two groups of people. And so medium really then is this process where we take ideas, we manifest them somehow, and then we share them between individuals or, like I said, groups of people, collective groups of people. And so not necessarily the earliest form of media, but a very early form of media is this notion of taking pigment of some sort and applying it to walls in caves, where many of those have survived a long time because of their protective, being protected inside the cave until larger groups of humans come and start breathing in those caves. So media, this idea of passing information between people has been an important part of our history for, tens of thousands of years. So the one thing I want to then talk about how media kind of start applying it back to virtual reality is that we talk about, going between, so here's the medium going between the creators or the communicants, it says here, and the recipients. We have this gulf we want to move between. So the people on this side create some virtual world, they express it somehow, manifest it, and then the people on this side experience it using whatever technologies they choose, right? Whichever medium noun they choose. And so then we have lots of different media we can choose from. The one thing then is that gap, that virtual world, of course, isn't really, it's a representation of reality, right? It's ideas and other things, but it's not the physical, it's not the real reality. It's just some means of something we want to convey. And Magritte's treachery of images picture kind of reflects that, right? So if you were to just put this up without the French below it and the English translation, and you saw this, you'd say, oh, that's a pipe, right? But it's not a pipe, of course. It's a picture, it's a painting of a pipe, but in this case, it's not a painting of a pipe. It's a badly pixelated digital scan of a painting of a pipe. And so you can go on from there, right? It's little lights and little pixels. all the way down. Here's a bunch of examples of media. I'm not going to read them, right? But so here's the cave painting I have is listed number 3, novels, maps, songs, puppetry, all the way down. And then this kind of this last bullet, virtual reality. Not necessarily that it's going to be the last medium, but it's kind of our what we're talking, our topic of the day and kind of the most modern media on the list. So here's virtual reality on this bullet list, along with written word and painting. And then this chart, which I'm not going to go over, but kind of one of the things I want to talk about is, we have all these media, right? Paintings, novels, music, plays, multi-user dimension or dungeon, virtual reality, to name 6. And then once we've named the medium, there's more to it than that though, right? There's the technology used. So if I'm painting, I might paint oil on canvas or pigment on wall or bits in computer memory. If I'm writing, I might write it on paper and bind it into a novel, or I might be posting a blog entry. And then virtual reality has, similarly, has different technologies. We have head-mounted displays, which Chauncey brought one there. We also have a thing called caves, which we're not going to go into the details of the differences between, but caves are more of the walk-in kind. You saw the guy laying on the floor before. That's a cave where you walk in and there's screens all around you. And so different technologies to produce these media, they're all kind of fall into this one big category. So these are technologies of a particular medium. And then whichever technology you choose then can influence the person, right? So someone reading a blog post has a different kind of takeaway than someone who's reading this, maybe even the same information, although lengthier in a novel or in a poem or something like that. So, so this technology is kind of part of what we call then the user interface, right? How do we get the manifested virtual world to the user? And for virtual reality, a lot of times people talked about this notion of having this ultimate interface where you felt like there was no interface. Where you were walking to the space, everything would just happen as though it were reality. And so it didn't feel like there was an interface at all. It was an invisible interface. The thing is that actually puts a limit on our technology, on our medium, right? That means we have to do everything as if it behaves in the real world, but maybe that's not the best way to do things. Right? And then this last bullet is sometimes, like you do with novels, turn them into movies. Virtual reality experiences might be, from a novel or something like that, or the other way around. Someone may take a virtual reality experience and convert it into a novel or something. I don't have any examples off the top of my head of that, but down the road, once VR, a lot more VR experiences are out there, we can see that happen. And then I alluded to this a little bit earlier. Who's the author of the experience, right? So that's why in some of the slides I use the word creator. The creator is the person who creates the computer bits in a certain order. But really, once an experience is felt, is experienced, it's both the collaboration between that person who created the computer code and models and the person who's put on the head-mounted display or walked into the cave, right? So it really has, it's like I said, this collaboration. And really, for a novel, we might say, well, there's definitely, we know who the author is and who the reader is. But at some point, the experience can change, right? So if you're reading a novel, a historical-based novel, for example, and you're a historian and you know about that period, you're reading it differently than somebody who's just kind of reading along for the story. You're saying, oh, that would never happen, or those two people would never have met, or that conversation is ridiculous, right? So you, as the reader, are part of the creator of that experience because it's different for you than it would be for other readers. Right, so the person or the recipient is always kind of part of that experience. All right, and then I think the last one in this slide is just to kind of discuss this notion of media within media, kind of as an aside. So you might be familiar with VR these days, both by having tried it, but also maybe by having read it or seen it in a movie. So VR, I don't know if this is necessarily the earliest, but the earliest kind of clearly virtual discussion of something that I would call virtual reality is from this short story in 1935, which is what this quote comes from. So the main protagonist here is like, fools, he took it to Westman, i.e. Eastman Kodak, right? And says, I have this great technology, and what do they say? It's too expensive, and only one person can use it at a time. It'll never take off, right? And of course, we experienced that in virtual reality for much of the 90s and the 2000s, but now it's become cost effective and it's actually happening. But this was from a short story, as I said, in 1935. And now I'm going to tag team back to Chauncey here, and we're going to talk about some examples, starting with examples.
So a lot of my work is actually in, actually, Bill, do you want to take this?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
One more slide for me. Yeah, so we're going to, I like to, in addition to talking about the technology of media, right, we also have this notion of genres. And so even though it's virtual reality head-mounted display, we might be showing something that's, in this case, mostly focused on humanities, but things where you're going to visit a place is one type of experience, or sometime where you're going to interact with a person might be another type of experience. So in later slides, we'll kind of go through different examples of the bullets on this list. So we'll look at historical places you can visit, or going to a historical place with interactions that are happening as if you were there at that time, right? So I'll call that historical period visits. We have a couple of examples of using VR as the medium of conveying fine art, and kind of on the flip side of that, using VR as the tool to create some artistic expression that may or may not ultimately be expressed in virtual reality. We'll look at some art collections that you can visit virtually through virtual reality, a lot of painting galleries, things like that. We'll talk a little bit about narrative, or what I call cinematic VR, which is kind of mostly 360 VR, things that you can do on your phone really easily, although not necessarily exclusively 360. And then we'll talk a little bit about using VR for training for different fields of scholarship. Back to Chauncey.
So I was alluding to, a lot of my work is having conversations with folks who aren't necessarily software engineers, but are professionals in other areas. And they're like, I know this technology has a way to help me teach this, or investigate this in their research. And I'm an analyst, so I keep up on the industry. I keep up with what's available and what IU has available and what we can make available at IU. And what's really great about this is then you slowly but surely over time find these low-hanging fruit for teachers and researchers to sort of like just plug right into whatever they already do. So Google Earth VR is one of our first examples here. This is a cultural heritage class, human origins and prehistory class, sorry. And this is based at IUPUI, that's where I'm based, but I kind of travel all over Indiana to help people. And they were studying Monte Alban in Oaxaca, Mexico. And to come kind of view the site, by the way, the professor, Alex here, he was working on that site in the summer and then coming and teaching during the fall. And then they were digitizing the site, but it wasn't quite ready for the students to experience the data that his research was presenting. So they used Google Earth as sort of like a preamble to what was going to come later. And actually, indeed, Alex had the initiative to finish out the research project to a level where they could put it in virtual reality and the students could come back and use it. The difference here is the first use case was a type 1. This was pre-existing. Google had already done the work, and their students just came in the lab and put on some headsets and kind of flew around and looked at the site, while Alex kind of gave them a narration just by walking past, having just have been there. And then here we have a higher resolution version that they used a drone to digitize using photogrammetry. And then this is sort of not specifically a reoccurring classroom activity, but I do want to mention that VR is a medium as well for creative use cases. So you don't have to necessarily just experience other people's work, but you can create your own work in virtual reality. And one of the first use cases that became popular with the newer headsets that are out in the last 10 years or so is sketching. Or there's a Google application called Tilt Brush. There's another one called Block where you can 3D model, and there's others to do animation. But anyway, one kind of anecdote I can give you is in Tilt Brush, since you can freeform sketch in 3D space, it's very similar to just an overhead projector, right? So you could actually teach in this space. Given a talk recently in South Bend, I asked the room of professors, does someone would like to come up and teach us something? This woman came up and I gave her a little crash course on how to use Tilt Brush, and she put the headset on and she taught people about radiology. So she was explaining to us by drawing a 3D grid, how a proton flies through a machine, like I think it was a CT scanner machine, to interact with the body in a certain way. And she was drawing and sketching and then also walking around it. And it was this floating apparition while we were seeing her perspective on the screen. And then what was nice is we were able to upload this right to Google Poly, which is a hosting sharing service that's free to use with your G Suite account. So then everyone had access to that data just from one little 5-minute lecture on that topic. So this is a type 3 project here where in Indianapolis, this is literally right across the street from where my office is. There's a historic African-American church called Bethel AME Church. and their congregation had been there for as long as Indianapolis has been there. And they unfortunately had to move out of the area because it was just too expensive to maintain their building. And they found just a better campus somewhere else outside of town. Well, by selling this, it was going to be just prime real estate on the canal for development. And it's being turned into, you know, some sort of living space, probably for startup companies and students. But this historic church with like woodwork everywhere that's just amazing looking was 3D scanned by this group of students and faculty. And then they remodeled it. So they're informatics students, they're all studying 3D modeling. And then they went ahead and took lots of reference photographs of the lighting and everything. And they redid all the natural lighting, and you can experience the space one-to-one. And this literally brought tears to the eyes of some of the congregation when they tried it, because they're like, oh my gosh, I used to like sit right there. So did my friends and family, you know. And this just led down the path of, you know, digital preservation. So there's a lot of things you can do in digital preservation with digitization and virtual reality for playback. And then Professor Margaret Delinsky here in the School of Fine Art is the Ashkenazi School of Art and Architecture and Design. I need to get that right. She has been doing virtual reality since, you know, I was in middle school, and it's always been expressionist type work with different forms of 3D content and 2D content coming together, sounds and light. And she started in University of Illinois, and she's come to IU, and she's been here for a while. You can take her class and actually learn to do this yourself. And every year we help our students produce a gallery show in virtual reality. It's very, very cool to see. This is something Bill and I recently started up working with on the School of Education. So their idea is that pre-service teachers are ill-equipped after they leave through the regiment of a bachelor's degree, let's say here on campus, to go right out into a K-12 classroom. So they want more exposure to what it's like to do classroom management, because it's a really important skill. So this is one more tool in our toolbox, theoretically, is to use virtual reality to simulate a classroom. You know, and the stage of production we're in right now is we're getting the visuals right so that you can actually see a classroom, and there's kids that are animate and they're moving and they're making noise. And interactivity is the hard part, right? Because these are pre-recorded, you know, and there's lots of different ways to do this. And we've prototyped here, prototyped there, and then we've started to boil down a pilot project, which I'm helping them produce right now. So, you know, hopefully the gold standard for this in the future would be an automated, you know, maybe AI or very smart decision tree algorithm guided experience where all you have to have is the student with a coach in the room, or not even a coach, and they can practice classroom management. So we're seeing a lot of training exercises for kind of frontline service careers in virtual reality being prototyped. In Indianapolis, at the Heron School of Art, this was a student I worked with a few years ago, where she had this really great furniture design. She indeed got a job in Minnesota doing sort of traditional furniture with like really advanced 3D printing things and doing some interesting things with taking modern fabrication and sort of old school ways to make furniture. And this springboarded her into that position. And what she had done was she had 3D printed the connector system that connects these dividers and just, you know, pieces of furniture that she designed, but she couldn't manufacture all this. It was just going to cost way too much. So she came to me asking, how do I use the HoloLens so I can just have a hologram of everything here? And luckily she was really good at 3D modeling, because she had been fabricating this stuff all digitally first. And I just showed her the workflow to just visualize it with the HoloLens, and she was able to do a gallery exhibit with a headset. And then she was able to record this, put that in her portfolio, and it was a means to an end. So for cost savings, augmented reality and virtual reality can be a good tool. This is happening at the Jacob School of Music right now, it's still in production. We were given access to a Google Jump camera, which is an array of 16 GoPros that shoots a very high resolution 360 video. That unfortunately is back at Google now, so we don't have access to it anymore. But they were able to shoot and record very high quality video and spatial audio. So you see this microphone up here. There was an array of them all around this ensemble. And they recorded more than just the guitar ensemble, but this one's actually up online, and I can share it if you're interested, where they actually spatially recorded a third order spatial recording. So ambisonic, if you're into audio, is very interesting because it's literally a recording that's spatial. It's like recordings from locations. It was kind of developed in the 70s when there was a lot of psychedelic rock music kind of happen. And I think Lou Reed made a multi-track album in Ambisonics. That was like one of the first. Well, it's kind of had a resurgence with virtual reality, where you can kind of record in various spatial landscapes. And in this case, we're just sitting in one spot, sitting in as one of the musicians. And they recorded this multiple times with one musician missing so that you could play the various parts. The idea is you actually sit in with it. You have a piece that fits into the ensemble and you play along with it. The challenge here is you can't just wear a VR headset and block out your hands or your mouth or whatever and not be able to operate your instrument unless you're really good. So we're actually blending, you know, the concept of AR and VR here, because we're considering using semi-transparent displays like the HoloLens, or the there's a few others where you actually put a cell phone in and they actually reflect the 3D video. So you have to be able to kind of see the real world and the video at the same time. And we're doing a lot of pilot ideas with this. It could be very cool if we could sort of connect the concept of maybe deceased musicians with an ensemble where we have missing pieces and you get to actually play with deceased musicians. All right, so I'll comment on a few of these, and then actually I'll hand it back to you. So there's been several historic site visit projects, a very natural fit as a medium for virtual reality. This is one I worked on where Professor Bernie Fisher in informatics actually lent me this data set to use for UITS, was going to supercomputing. We had to create something flashy, something cool to show off, which I immediately capitalized on as an opportunity to push the technology, because I was given a lot of time and effort to put into this. What I generated was actually a virtual tour through this palace that Bernie, as a graduate student, had generated, called the Piazza d'Oro, which is Emperor Hadrian's palace that he created. It's part of a massive complex, but it's just one specific area that was like a party dining hall. And as you go through this, there's music and there's ambience and there's active air. So you see the particles and the pollen in the air. And I actually had heat hooked up so you can feel the sunlight, because this is in Italy. You could actually, oh yeah, there's a rig right here. This is what we showed at Supercomputing. You could feel the wind from different directions. We had a smell emitter here because at some point you actually got in front of a triclinium banquet table and food would come up to your face and you would smell it. So the idea was an educational resource beyond just lectures, documentaries, discussions, videos on YouTube. Now you could use some almost like Disney level simulator to experience like a field trip in virtual reality. That was the whole concept, is really just spike into a niche and show what's possible. And then of course, Dr. Bernie Fisher's done some way more sustainable work, whereas this takes a lot of equipment to install and set up, and it's not even on display anymore. This you can get access to right now, and it's part of, I can't remember the name. Rome Reborn, my bad. So you can actually get to this on many different VR headsets, and it's a reconstruction of ancient Rome. So.
All right, great. So we're kind of gradually transitioning here from IU-specific things to broader community and virtual reality. So as Chauncey mentioned, he worked on the Piazza d'Oro one. Bernie Fisher, who's a professor here, his Rome Reborn has actually been a project he's been involved with for, I think, at least 2 decades. In various places he's been teaching and companies. So as was mentioned, Rome Reborn you can buy on Steam VR store or the Oculus store. They have different little anecdotes, and so they're like $2 or $3 each or something like that. One of Bernie's students is one below the Rome Reborn. One of the Bernie students who's gone over to Italy and France and places several times with Bernie to do various captures. It also goes on and does his own projects. And so this one is the Scrivengi, is that I'm pronouncing it right? Scrivengi Chapel by Giotto. And so what he actually did, so he's working on this as a side project on his, with a small team, and he's taken some historical discussions that, or discussions by art historians, I should say, that are available on YouTube. And with their permission, they were just kind of showing pictures and discussing the pictures within the chapel. With their permission, he took their narrative and put it into his own 3D reconstruction of that space. And so you can hop around to different places or walk around. And when you hit some of these hot spots, it'll give you this narrative that was produced by these art historians. Kind of along those same lines, this one in the upper right here is the Sistine Chapel, and specifically we're looking at the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And in this particular kind of narrative, it's talking about the scaffolding that Michelangelo used to do the painting on the chapel. And then it has little augmentations, right? So this little paper in the middle is a letter that Michelangelo wrote describing the ordeal of having to paint up on the scaffolding and do this whole ceiling and things. But you can actually visit around in different places in the chapel, and again, there'll be an art historian that narrates different aspects of the Sistine Chapel. And this one was just debuted last month at the Computer Graphics Conference, but it'll be available on various VR stores come November, I believe. If you go to sistinevr.com, you'll see that. And then the last one on this slide, this using Google Earth. So this is a picture of Google Earth in the lower right here. And Chauncey mentioned using that kind of, one of the professors went out and kind of did some recon at Monte Alban before, and then did some drone flying. So Google Earth can kind of serve as that tool. I thought maybe Machu Picchu would be the same, but actually it's not 3D reconstructed. It's just satellite pictures on top of terrain, but it does have street view stuff, so you can kind of do some recon before you go and perhaps do a better job of modeling it. And so that's kind of this anywhere, or at least anywhere outdoors view. So that's one of those genres I talked about a few slides ago. The next genre that's kind of similar, but kind of has some augmentation, is this historical period visits. And so these first two on the left here are from a kind of a historical itself virtual reality application. It's about 20 years old, called Virtual Harlem. And so in this case, professor of like Black Studies from Missouri State, I believe, he recreated a range of Harlem near the Apollo Theater. And so you could go like 2 or 3 blocks in either direction. In this case, Alan here is riding a streetcar that goes along. You can go into the Cotton Club, and there's actually, videos that were taken from YouTube. Actually, I don't know if YouTube existed when this application first came up, but anyway, videos that were, so I think this is Cab Calloway on stage up here. And you could go to different places in this little virtual Harlem from the 1920s. You might walk by a group of people on the sidewalk and overhear their conversations. So a lot of, voice recording was available in the 20s, and so there are these kind of little historical anecdotes out there, and so you might pass by some people and hear that. This work is ongoing, so this was done in kind of a proprietary system or a closed system. They went and put that in Second Life after that, but then their Second Life stuff kind of went away, and now I think they're recreating it in Unity. This next one on the upper middle is I Am a Man, so it's a civil rights experience where, again, you kind of are there at certain events. You can see Martin Luther King Jr. up on the hotel balcony here, I guess shortly before he's assassinated. But it has other aspects of that whole event, the sanitation strike in Memphis and things like that, that you get kind of into little historical anecdotes about that. And then the rest of the pictures are from a combined kind of experience. Well, 2 experiences done by the same company. So the one on the right, upper right, is the Apollo 11 experience. So here you are sitting in a living room. You're watching President Kennedy's speech on creating a program to go to the moon. And but then after you do that, you can actually become an astronaut, sit in one of the Apollo capsules, and experience part of that as if you were the astronaut themselves. And so that's one experience that this company has done. They've also done this other experience called Titanic VR, which I have 3 different pictures here, and we'll talk about the middle one a little bit later because it applies to another genre, I feel. But in this one, you can actually go around, and they have reconstructed the Titanic or parts of the Titanic, and it's like you're flying a little drone, and so you have a video image, and you can fly around and see things, and maybe fish swim out of different portholes and things like that. The middle one is like your little research ship. So once you collect objects from the Titanic, you can bring them into your research ship, do a little work on preserving things that you found down there. And then it also has this narrative, so you can actually be on the deck of the Titanic when the alarms go off and everybody's gathering around what's going on, and people are being separated, who gets to get on the lifeboats and who doesn't. And so you get to experience like a 15-minute, just kind of pure narrative, other than the fact you can walk around and you're following these people around. So we talked a little bit about Margaret's fine artwork earlier, Chauncey did, and I mentioned this application earlier, so I won't say too much about it. It's kind of repeat pictures. This is the artist in the center picture, Rita Addison. And as I said before, she's a kind of professional photographer who did photography as fine art, and then had this thing where she couldn't use a camera anymore after her car accident. And so, because of the way her brain was now functioning. And so she wanted to tell people kind of her experience, and she used virtual reality for that. So there was kind of a little narrative. You got to experience a virtual car crash, which was 2 decades ago, so very stylized. And then you got to see her artwork, where sometimes it was clouded, so you can't see much of it. Sometimes you had tunnel vision, sometimes you had this kind of warped vision, and you would get to see different optical deficiencies that she would experience. And as Chauncey mentioned, we can use, of course, Google Tilt Brush as a tool to create 3D shapes, and he mentioned some others, blocks. There's also one called Gravity Sketch, which is kind of more engineering style. So here you can kind of sketch things up in different forms. You can save them, you can export them just like you can with Tilt Brush. And so Tilt Brush is, so these are things you can also get on the Steam store. They do cost money. I think they're both basically $30. But as we'll mention later in the talk, there are places on campus, including on the other tower of this building, where you can use these. They're already pre-purchased, and you can just go and use them. Well, actually, that's true for Tilt Brush. I don't know if that's true for Gravity Sketch yet, but in many of the cases, it's true. So another thing we mentioned is a genre is the kind of bringing artwork together, so you don't have to travel to see it. And even if you had to travel to see it, there's like the Kremer collection might be all of different, what is it? What is Rembrandt? Danish? Like mostly Danish artists? Dutch, right, sorry. Different artists, and bring their collections together, where you might have to hop around to different museums all around the world, but now you can kind of see them laid out in maybe chronological sequence, and you can see a certain artist's work. And they actually used photogrammetry to capture a lot of the pictures, not necessarily all of them, but you can then, with the photogrammetry, you can use that to see brush strokes, not just kind of a scanned image of it. So that's the Kremer Museum. That one I think costs $10, but again, we have some purchase of it. There's the Museum of Fine Art, which has different types of, different media, right? Different fine art media, has sculptures, has paintings. I don't know what else it has other than that, actually. But they have things like from different parts of the world. Oh, this is the Kremer Museum, sorry, on the right. This one is the Museum of Fine Art. And so here's this gallery, and there's different places you can go. So there's paintings, but you can also go see the terracotta soldiers. I don't think that's her. They're like in a room off to the side. So you can see a little scan of the terracotta soldiers from China. And then different, like I said, different forms of artistic fine art media. And then the middle one is the last bullet on here, the VR Donghang, which is some Buddhist chapels near the city of Donghang in China. And so this one has an outdoor space, but then mostly you use it to kind of hop to different chapels, which again, they're all near this city, but they're all not right next to each other. So you'd have to do some traveling. And here you can kind of hop from temple to temple, and it will highlight, there'll be a little narrative, and it might highlight different aspects of the temple and how it was, what religious imagery it's conveying. All right. You want to talk on any of this, or you want me to do it? Sure. All right, so we'll tag team on this one too. All right.
For those of you online, I'm shaking this around. One of my favorite new trends in virtual reality is cinematic VR, mostly because you're recording the real world and essentially being involved in the evolution of video production or photography. And the idea is you're capturing the real world to tell a story or create a new art piece, maybe collect data. But the point is here, there are people experimenting in ways that don't involve just 360 video, which some of you have probably seen on social media, or you might even have tried a 360 video camera. So there's a journalism group called Emblematic, headed up by Nani De La Pena, is that right? De La Pena, and she's from University of Southern California.
Yeah, she started her own company now.
Yeah, right on. But they have two really nice pieces. One of them won an award here called After Solitary. So this is a New England They still had solitary confinement for a long time, but you go into a 3D scanned solitary confinement cell with one of the folks who spent 5 years in solitary confinement, and goes to this really emotional discussion about his state before and after, and what he went through, and how inhumane it could be to be stuck in solitary confinement for so long. Really amazing way to tell a story. So journalism, of course, has a lot to sort of still Pac-Man through as far as what's possible with virtual reality, and they're really pushing the boundaries. This one here is called Greenland Melting, and they take you explicitly to these sites in Greenland where they can show you literally everything melting away, and the scientist is a 3D scanned scientist, and you actually can see it for yourself. Okay, so this is the whole point, is bringing people to these locations in a very portable fashion. Bill's got some other examples here. Do you want to talk about these? Okay.
All right, so yeah, so kind of other different styles of creating these cinematic, these narrative VRs. So the New York Times, back in, I think it was late 2015 already, they shipped to all their subscribers a little Google Cardboard, a little phone holder that would let you look around and see 360 images by using your phones and these Google holders. And so at that time, they were also then, of course, creating content to go with that. And so they had a department that was specifically going out and doing stories where they had something interesting to see in 360. And so one of the places they went was Antarctica. So they did several different parts of it. They went underwater in Antarctica. They went to McMurdo Station. They were there. They would fly over when scientists were flying over the ice sheets to measure things. And so you could experience all this kind of as a prepackaged narrative. Time kept moving, but you could look around and see different things. You were riding on the airplane, you could look around the airplane with all the equipment. Now, unlike the one with the Greenland one here, where they have actually like a modeled or scanned boat and a modeled scientist, you were stuck in one place, right? So you were stuck wherever they put the 360 camera, which I'll talk about in a moment. And so you could look around, you had the freedom to look around, but not to move around. So a different style of cinematic. And that's the same for this lower middle one, which is an experience called Being Henry. So Henry here suffered a stroke, and he was paralyzed except for like his thumbs and his neck and his eyes, the ability to blink. And so he does all his communicating, of course, using computer technology. And a documentarian decided she would make it so that you could kind of experience what it's like to be Henry. So in the VR experience, you don't actually see Henry, right? This is a picture of it being captured. Instead, they put a 360 camera where Henry would be, and then things happen. So his wife comes in and she feeds him. She helps him get ready. And then he's done a lot of work actually where he's helped museums put little roving robots and stuff like that. And so they talk about some of the work he's done to help people who are also in his condition at least get out into the world virtually, so to speak. And then this last one is one of many narratives created by a company called Balbeo. And this one's called Crow, the Legend. And so it has kind of some Native American motifs in it, and about how, the crow became a constellation or whatever. And so this one, it's animated, so there's no camera, that's fixed camera. You can still walk around a little bit. It does have it does have a flowing narrative though, so you can't really entirely change the direction of the narrative, but you might be able to slow it down by, say, it's waiting for you to do something, right? So it wants you to do something to help the crow, and until you do, the narrative just kind of pauses, and all the characters kind of idle around for a little bit. And then at some point you have to help it fly. I haven't experienced this one in person, so I can't give any more description than that. But anyway, they've done several of these kind of experiences where you go, and because it's animated, there's the ability to do a lot of flexibility, but it's still a kind of a straight-on narrative, or it's still a delineated narrative, but the narrative can kind of pause or maybe take small branches. And then finally, for our genre list, is this one where we talked about training in a field of scholarship. So Chauncey already talked about this one in the lower right here, where he and I did some scanning stuff and we're kind of prototyping stuff for the School of Education. I already mentioned this one in the upper right, which is the Titanic VR, where once you find a briefcase, which is one of the things you do find in the experience. Inside, it tells you what to do before you open the briefcase. You don't want to just open it, right? You should soak it in some sort of bath, and it has all the equipment for that. Then once you do, you find a bone comb, I think, and maybe some money and a notebook. And so it tells you how to process each of these types of artifacts before you go and start, opening the pages of the book or flipping through the money or what have you. And so again, a little bit of training. And then the other three of these pictures in the middle are from an VR experience developed at University of Illinois for the archaeology department rather, where they took the tasks that students have to learn before they go into an actual dig site. And normally they'd have a kind of like a prototype dig, right, where you go and you'd learn how to use the tape measure and how to use a toothbrush and things like that. But you have to go somewhere, it's muddy, it's time constraining. So they decided to create a virtual reality experience where you do kind of the same sort of things. You have your own virtual tape measure, you move around in the space, so you have to have a space big enough that's kind of like a, maybe 3 by 3 meter dig space. And then, so this is what the virtual reality looks like. And there's a table with a hat and a tape measure and a toothbrush and things like that. You have to go, you have to set up the strings to kind of delineate different regions so you can measure things. You have to measure the depth of where you find objects. You get all these skills before you go into an actual dig. I'm sure at this point they're still doing, kind of also going to a little school education, pedagogical dig site as well. But this is something that they're working on so the students can do this more efficiently. And so next, I think we're going to tag back Chauncey. So.
All right, so this is sort of the tools of the trade that you can get access to quite easily here at IU. Yeah, so we're back to this type 1, 2, and 3. What's nice about this is I'm going to talk a lot about tools that you can use with type 2 right now. Okay, so again, capturing your own data to bring to some other application that you don't have to engineer yourself. Thanks. So we have here sort of spherical cameras. So when you author virtual reality with a 360 video, let's say, or 360 photos, you're just capturing a bubble essentially, and then you're putting your user in the middle of it. And that bubble can be very high resolution. It could be 3D, it could be low resolution. You should definitely try these out before you embark on a project because your results may vary. Keep going here. We have the Matterport scanner. This is a tool that I really enjoy using. It's a very quick tool made for real estate. So it's built for a niche market, but you can use it for other things in real estate. I scanned my parents' house. I'm working on a personal project, which I brought my personal headset in here to show today, of a house that I grew up in that they just sold and I can no longer access anymore. So now I can still go to it in virtual reality. I'm going to put all our home videos all mapped out in it so that I can experience all of those memories with data instead of the real place. Here we have photogrammetry as an option. This is unique to IU. So we are one of very small number of universities that have access to photogrammetry software spread across a supercomputer. So Bill's done a lot of work with Tassie's group and some of the engineers in UITS to get the supercomputer Big Red and Carbonate and the other ones working so that you can access it from anywhere to do photogrammetry. So you can literally go with drone data and make Montauban here, as you can see, or here's the chapel on campus. And this is actually taken over in Italy.
Photos from your phone.
Yeah, France, sorry. There's going to be a talk about photogrammetry in a couple weeks, as we alluded to. Keep going. Okay, so there is a suite, like there is the Adobe suite, right? That's one company making a series of tools that sort of all work together and mix and match. Well, Google's kind of trying to mimic this, all right? So we have Tilt Brush, Blocks, and then Microsoft has their own maquette here. And they're using some open standards, and that's why they can kind of work together. And then Google's sort of got this breakaway hit called Poly. So go ahead and hit advance. Poly is a place where you can put virtual tours, which I'll talk about in a moment, as well as 3D models from this. When I teach classes and we have to get to a sketching exercise, I don't require traditional sketching anymore or anything like that. I use Tilt Brush or Blocks or maquette, whatever the student prefers, so that they have sort of free access to the 3D environment to generate a sketch, upload it to Poly, and send me a link for the assignment. So this is how that's used a lot in my kind of circles, but you can use it to create your own art piece and actually literally throw it back into Unity if you know how to work with Unity. So, all right, let's keep going. So then virtual tours are a very accessible thing for you. So consider if you just want to take somebody to a place so they get a chance to see what you're talking about, you can generate a tour with Tour Creator very quickly with Google Street View images, okay? Or you could take the photos yourself and upload them to Tour Creator. Once you're done with that tour creation, you can actually upload them to Poly. And then once you're on Poly, you can access it with a Google Cardboard or just with your phone or even a desktop. So it makes this cross-platform capability to make virtual reality content nice and and neat, but you can also embed traditional media, which I'll show in a moment. YouTube will take 360 videos as well at very high resolutions, and they support ambisonic audio, as I mentioned with the Jacob School project. No, nice demo. Yep, keep going. So here's a project that Tassie and Matt Mercer put together about the limestone tour on campus. So here we have the sample gates, and we have some photos from the era, sort of looks like a press actually. And then text here, and then these are interactive buttons that bring these traditional media up. You can embed sound. So one of the locations, you can actually hear a bell coming from a bell tower. What's the name of that location? Student building. Okay, I'm not that familiar with the Bloomington. Okay, moving on. I have created a bunch of tutorials. I'm sorry this is blurry. I can get to these to you offline if you're interested. But these literally walk you through on YouTube style tutorials, me discussing how you get through the minutia of doing this kind of stuff if you want to go real deep on it. We're talking less than an hour's worth of video here. So I don't know how you feel about video tutorials. I absolutely love them. So virtual reality at IU is, oh yeah, so I should mention, so Bill and I work in the Advanced Visualization Lab. It's a UITS lab geared up to help researchers, okay? But we also help everyone at IU. We're basically here to help. And we have been around since 1997, so we're now decades inside of our evolution. We started with VR right away with the cave. That was actually here in Bloomington. We built our own 3D screen called the Johnny Box before 3D TVs were available. We've worked with vendors, and then we've become a vendor. Not really a vendor, but an integrator, thanks to Chris Eller here, building IQ walls, and really becoming basically the experts in building ultra high resolution paneled tiled walls in the Midwest, basically. Well, close to Chicago. We have spherical displays, and we just continue to kind of move along as it makes sense for the university. We have a lot of learning opportunities beyond these workshop series, which you can kind of see here. We have classes that you can attend that aren't necessarily hosted by us, but other professors that we're kind of deeply supporting because we've been around with them for a long time. Indeed, I teach a class in Indianapolis in School of Informatics called Experiential Innovation. Sonny Kirkley also is up there, who's an augmented reality just veteran. He's been working with the Department of Defense since the early 90s doing military augmented reality and backpack-based system. Michael Chabin down here. Bill, of course, teaches virtual reality in the School of SICE, actually, here in Bloomington. And then Professor Dolinsky, as we mentioned earlier. We have the Cyber DH workshop series here. And then in the spring, Bill will be hosting a scientific visualization. Well, is that what it's called? Yeah, Cyviz. And then Reality Labs. So this is important. So this is a investment that we made starting in 2017, where we worked with other UITS groups that manage these locations like the Scholars Commons and other parts of the Wells Library. In fact, the 3D printing lab has 8 of these, or 10 of these. Yeah, yeah. So you can go there today and access VR stations that run Steam VR with an HTC Vive pre-purchase software. So these are generally powerful workstations, but you can also do VR on them. Yeah, so we pre-purchase content. We also are right now deploying IU created content to them, so that'll be deployed on them very soon. Which they're on our KB article. If you search for Reality Labs, it'll show you how to get to that. Let's see here. So then there's, yeah, I mentioned it's a regular workstation as well. They're just very powerful gaming computers. Next slide. Okay, so click next and it'll show you where they're at. So we currently have about 70 of these deployed across IU's campuses, and some of these are accessible, some of them are not. That's the take-home point. Okay, so sometimes you'll see on the KB article where they're at, and you'll go there and it's like, it's locked. Check to see if it says public on the listing, okay? Because some of these are managed by classroom services, which they lock at nighttime because there's other equipment in the room. It's not public. Right. So FA 215, Fine Art 215, and the Wells Library one are the closest to where you are right now. They're going to be generally open access, although the one in Fine Art will have classes. So the Oculus Quest is a new headset that we just want to promote a little bit because it does represent the most portable field version of a high quality virtual reality headset right now. They're $400. I purchased one on my own. The lab is considering how and what we might do as far as making them available. But if you're really excited about VR, I highly encourage you to see if you can get a hold of one to own yourself, because they are pretty cool. We have flagship facilities. So we have a thing called the Next Lab in Indianapolis, and this is being retooled right now as we are facing a building renovation. And then down in Bloomington here, we're working on deploying a Next Lab as well. So they basically be kind of dual advanced facilities. In this lab, you're going to find an advanced IQ wall. Go ahead and advance the slide. Oh, well, I'll start here. So we have this thing called the Reality Stage in Indianapolis. This is a system where you can mount all kinds of things around your user for sensory, for feedback. Like here, we're doing wind. This person's in a hot air balloon virtually, so they're feeling the heat from the blast valve. They can feel the fans. You do training simulators. You can mount a harness and put a person in it that would be hanging from something for therapy or even just for an experience. The point here is it's a black box experimentation space. If you've graduated from using the reality stations, you need more in your research. That's what the Next Labs are for. So this is the concave, well, I should say the reconfigurable IQ wall. We're calling this the concave configuration because you can reconfigure these panels into various different shapes for different purposes. It's not easy to do this very quickly, but if given enough notice and enough really good reason, we will sort of get these situated for you in a way that makes sense. But its default state is 32 panels, as you can see here, 15,360 pixels wide and a concave shape. It will run stereoscopic visuals, and we're putting tracking on it. So you can make it a giant window into a virtual world, which is great for using a large group of people in front of it. This is the reconfigured version of that for facing outward. We call this the pillar. And you can see that kind of here. And then this is the reality stage there. Okay, next slide. Oh yeah, and then Bill's an author, and he asked me to be part of this. So we have a developer gems book that just came out, and then there's Bill's second edition to Understanding Virtual Reality. So very cool stuff. The CAV, do you want to talk about this? Yeah, it's coming soon.
Yeah, so we're also hosting this international conference on basically people who use advanced displays for visualization or other topics, and and we're hosting that in October, and so that'll be at the Memorial Union, and we have a call for abstracts out this Friday. Sorry, oops, angled. So yeah, so there's a call for abstracts out for that goes through next Friday, but that's a little conference that we're going to be hosting. We're kind of demonstrating our next labs and things like that. And so that pretty much wraps things up. As Tassie mentioned at the beginning, we're going to be doing an expedition of this same topic next week. So we're going to talk, so a lot of the applications that we talked about, and then a few others, we'll actually have live demonstrations of those. We'll have different VR technologies here. We'll have Quests, we'll probably have Vives, maybe some Rift S's. And so we'll have a lot of those experiences. Some of the ones that you have to pay for normally, we'll just have up and running. And so that's what we're going to do next week. And that is all.